În ce fel de context ai minți?
Politic.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again on our podcast. Since we are in May, may you rest in peace, Romanian lion. You will never be forgotten. But lions don't die when dogs bark. So don't sell in May and go away. Let's make Romania great again. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're having Adrian Tîrcă once again on our podcast to discuss the unfolding events in Romania. It seems like we're in the same place as 6 months ago, hosting the second round of the presidential elections. Now, between maybe not the right candidate, but definitely the candidate of the right, George Simion, and the extreme left, pro-Soros activist, Nicușor Dan.
Thank you very much for having me, and let's hope that in 6 months' time we will not be discussing the exact same thing, the third round of the first round of the Romanian presidential elections. Let's hope they will not keep on cancelling, and every 6 months we'll have a new shot at electing a president.
Right. As Nassim Taleb says, I hope this extreme left candidate won't become a left tail event for our country. So
yeah, it's hard to say if he's a left-wing candidate, because now when you only have two remaining candidates, and one is definitely of the conservative right, the other one encompasses the entire political spectrum apart from the conservative right. This is also what can be seen through his support. So George Simion is supported by the sovereigntists in Europe, and he's a member of the European Conservatives and Reformists Party. Whereas Nicușor Dan, even though his party is affiliated with Renew Europe, so the Macron pseudo-liberal, pseudo-left liberal, but also hegemonic European party, he also encompasses all the support of the mainstream political spectrum. So that's the People's Party, the Social Democrats, the Greens, basically everybody, and also the entire left. So yeah, you could say on the one hand that Nicușor Dan is left-wing, but then again, he encompasses the entire political spectrum right now, except for the conservatives in Europe, at least in the mainstream political spectrum.
Right. How about you? Which candidate do you support and why?
Well, it's a very easy choice for me. I will support George Simion, of course. I've also voted for him in the first round for very, very obvious reasons. During the pandemic, George Simion and his party defended my right to remain unvaccinated and not to be cast out of society as a consequence. I went to his protest during those 6 months when we had the Green Pass implemented, and I could not go to any kind of venues. I could not go into public institutions. I could not go to restaurants, bars, libraries, museums. I could not sign up for university. I could not extend my ID. There were many, many things that I could not do being unvaccinated. And the party of George Simion was the one that upheld my rights, whereas the party of the other candidate, of Nicușor Dan, was the most adamant to forcing me to take the vaccine. They even wanted to pass a law in the Romanian parliament prohibiting the right to work for unvaccinated Romanians. So they wanted to not only cast me out of society the way they did, but even to push it further and to not allow me to have a job. So for me, it's a very, very easy choice. But even more so, it is made even easier because of what each candidate stands for, not only because of the pandemic and the vaccine, but George Simion is the candidate of the sovereigntist camp. He would like Romania to develop some autonomy with respect to Brussels, for us not to be just the vassals of the decisions made in Brussels, either at the EU or at the NATO level. Whereas Nicușor Dan is just the candidate of the establishment. He would like things to remain as they are, maybe for Romania to become even more even more vassalized because he is a less competent leader and a less likely candidate to actually stand up to Brussels than even our former president, Iohannis, who was very weak as well. So a Nicușor Dan presidency is obvious for me that it would be one of servitude, one of bondage towards Brussels. And my final reason to not vote for Nicușor Dan is that I've actually met the guy and I've actually worked for him, and I know
Really?
how incompetent he actually is. I know the level of his incompetence. So yeah, it's a very easy choice for me.
You've personally met Nicușor Dan?
Yeah, I was a member of his party a few years back, like before the pandemic. Yeah, I was a member of USR, and I've also worked with Nicușor, and yeah, I can testify that he's not only competent, but he's also not mentally fit for any kind of public office. Just as it is quite transparent, actually, for people who see him on television. Many people can see that he suffers from some sort of autistic spectrum syndrome, and he's not very functional in this respect. This is why he's not exactly a good candidate to lead a country. He's not a good candidate to lead an institution, but even more so to lead a country. So I would not see Nicușor Dan representing Romania in summits at the international level. He's very intimidated by other people. The thing is, how Nicușor works is that he has a circle of people he trusts, and they have some sort of an affection bond. And he's very intimidated by people from outside the circle. So I'm really curious to see how Nicușor would function on the international stage with people like Trump or Putin or any kind of world leader, Erdogan, to try to negotiate something at the international level.
So do you see this possible scenario for Nicușor Dan becoming the president of Romania as a liability for us or not?
Completely. I think it would be a very cruel joke. I'm trying to think if there was any other world leader that suffered from this autism that made him completely not functional. So there are some people whose brains function a bit differently, like, I don't know, say Javier Milei, but he's also very aggressive, so he can compensate for his let's say neurodiversity, to call it in a euphemistic manner, whereas Nicușor Dan is just very shy. So it would be very, very strange to have him as a leader. I'm sure it would be a liability for Romania, because every country needs to be represented at the international level by somebody who is competent to speak to other world leaders, to understand their point of view, to project his own point of view, I mean the point of view of his country, and so on. So in international negotiations or in negotiations of any kind, it is very strange to send somebody who is very, very easily intimidated and who loses his train of thought very easily, who is distracted all the time. And even more so, another thing about Nicușor Dan is that he has the interests of somebody with autism who is not very emotionally developed. And he's not very interested in grown-up issues, even though he's into politics at a high level. He's not actually very interested in politics or in public policy or these kinds of things. So I don't see the potential for him to become, let's say, educated in foreign relations, because right now he obviously isn't. But he also probably doesn't have the curiosity and the motivation to become competent in this field.
I see. What about George Simion? He is often labeled as too aggressive or unfit for presidency. Do you think this criticism is justified or politically motivated?
I think the criticism is justified, unfortunately. So right now, Romania is not exactly in the best scenario. It has to choose between two candidates who do not have such a long political background. Both of them have been in politics. Well, Nicușor Dan has been in politics since 2016. George Simion has been in politics since 2020. So they're quite fresh, not let's say not tenured enough to be able to lead the country. And with regards to George Simion's conduct, he was an activist in a rather more nationalist and aggressive way before entering politics. And he does have this history of physical confrontation with the police, protests turning violent. Yeah, you could say, I mean, the people who argue that he's perhaps too aggressive to be a good president, maybe they do have a point. Of course, now he's more grown up. He has had more experience at the international level. He seems a different person right now than from his activist youth, because he's more restrained. He speaks in a calmer manner. He is no longer this typical politician who tries just to project force. He's now also trying to project maturity, at least in his public image so far. So he may have overcome that obstacle of his let's say turbulent youth. I hope, because these are the only two choices left. So if one of them is not competent, we can only hope that the other one is.
So you hope that he's more mature right now than he's young.
He's 38 or 39, 38, I think. So yeah, quite young.
What about his nationalist tone? Do you think it could lead to economic instability like currency depreciation or capital flight?
Well, I think these effects can be not because of his tone, but because of what his adversaries paint him as. The whole propaganda machine in Romania is now working overtime to say that he's selling our country to the Russians, that he's a Nazi, that he will bring in a dictatorship, and so on. And all of these things might actually destabilize the economy. I don't see his speeches or his brand of nationalism as being in any way problematic for the economy, because he is part of the most mainstream conservative political family in Europe. He's not pro exiting the European Union. He's not pro exiting NATO. He's not pro any kind of harsh measures. He's rather mainstream. I mean, he's in the same political family as Bart de Wever, the Prime Minister of Belgium. He's in the same political family as Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, also the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, and the President of Poland, who is now running for re-election. So it's not like Romania is picking this candidate who is completely unknown and from a fringe political group. No, he's quite mainstream in this sense. Probably his his economic views are that of a mainstream conservative European. So no, I would not regard his presidency to lead to such events because of him. However, what might happen was that his adversaries might continue with the propaganda and with the intoxication even after he gets elected, and we might have some, I don't know, some political turmoil, some protests, some color revolution attempt. So then, okay, maybe the economy will become destabilized, but it would not be because of him per se.
Right. I prefer for Romania to move forward, but for now, let's move back a little bit to Nicușor Dan. He's often seen as incompetent in foreign affairs and disconnected from geopolitical realities. Is it due to lack of experience or simply because foreign policy was never his priority?
I would say foreign policy was never his priority because he made his name as an activist at the local level for local problems, for things regarding heritage, built heritage, things regarding architecture, things regarding urbanism and green space, parks, things like this. And also because of his neurological type, so to say, he's not exactly endowed with a broad vision. So these things about society, such ample problems like geopolitical outlook and stuff like this, they don't really enter into his sphere of preoccupation. Maybe this could change now, because he might become president. After taking office, he might actually have to educate himself on foreign affairs. But right now, it was not one of his subjects of interest, and I don't really see him as a legitimate candidate in this regard. I mean, he's just a political vehicle for going from one step to the next in the Romanian hierarchy, in the hierarchy of the Romanian state. First, the leader of a political party, and then mayor of Bucharest, and then, of course, this is a position that allows you to have greater exposure and to claim the presidency of the country after claiming, let's say, the capital. But this is not exactly something that fits his interests. He did not run for office in December, for example. He did not show any kind of interest in national politics, and not to mention international politics. Now, all of a sudden, because Călin Georgescu was taken out of the game and the elections had to be redone with different candidates, then he expressed his interest to run, and all of a sudden, there he is. He stands right now a very good chance of becoming the next president of Romania. He should have had some sort of tenure in national politics, in some sort of role which exposed him to foreign affairs, but this was not the case. So in the past 5 years, he has been handling, unsuccessfully in my opinion, but he has been handling the problems of Bucharest regarding roads, infrastructure, pipes, heating, parking lots, stuff like this. And now all of a sudden he wants to become president of Romania without any foreign policy experience or interest.
Can his ties to controversial figures like Matei Păun raise concerns about judgment or external influence?
Well, because I know the story with Matei Păun from the inside, let's say, or a bit of the story, not the entire story. But well, I was exposed to this, so I have my impression for it.
You were a lucky man. You've met both Nicușor Dan and Matei Păun.
Yes. Well, I cannot say fortunately. Let's say I've had this chance, and yeah. How I've seen their relationship is just because Nicușor is not very mentally aware and not very mentally competent, Matei Păun is the handler. So Matei Păun is the guy who created the Nicușor Dan project. Nicușor Dan was an activist among many activists.
So Matei Păun is not only a myth, is a reality?
Yeah, he exists, yes, of course. But I mean, the media has documented him extensively.
But I thought that, for instance, Andrei Caramitu is bullshitting us with this Matei
Păun. No. Andrei Caramitu is spot on. So one of the few things that Caramitu is actually right on is Matei Păun.
Can you tell us more about what you know?
Yeah, of course. So Nicușor Dan was one of these activists in 2010 regarding the Roșia Montană project, regarding Punjești, and he was selected by this figure, Matei Păun, to be promoted first as mayoral candidate for Bucharest in 2012. Then
but
again,
why?
Of course, I can only speculate. So after seeing their relationship, my guess is that Matei Păun chose Nicușor just because Nicușor is autistic, not functioning, and unaware. So basically, in their relationship, Nicușor Dan is a willing puppet. Nicușor Dan could not have done much with his life, given his mental circumstances. He just had a job as a researcher at the Institute of Mathematics of the Romanian Academy. But even there, he did not write many academic articles. His research did not actually produce much output. And by becoming the puppet of Matei Păun, which he actually is, Nicușor Dan was given great opportunities. Nicușor Dan was facilitated access to becoming a politician. I think he was a senator between 2016 and 2020. the leader of a political party, of having this great image in the Romanian media, and finally to become mayor of Bucharest and to run for the highest office. So
but he was a math Olympiad medalist, right?
Yeah, in 1987. Yeah. Yes, but I mean, he's intelligent in some sense. He is able to solve complex mathematical problems, but his mental acuity is not very good right now. He's not very sharp. He is not very focused. He's like I don't know. He's like how these geniuses are portrayed in movies. You know, in American movies, like the mad scientist who boils his watch instead of boiling an egg and stuff like this. He's like this, you know. And Matei Păun is the organizer of the project, of the Nicușor Dan project. Matei Păun supported him supported him throughout all this transformation from an activist with a hippie outlook and with unkempt hair and with clothes that were just picked randomly out of the drawer. So he's not very aware what he dresses with and all of this, into the respectable politician that you see now, always wearing a suit. These things are exactly for contrast, because Nicușor is completely not like that. You know, he's not articulate. He does not dress nicely. He does not pay attention to how he dresses. This is why they always keep him in a suit right now, to contrast with how he really is.
So basically, is Nicușor Dan a man of the deep state?
Man, I have no idea.
Or is manipulated by pro-Russian Matei Păun?
In this sense, plus I have last seen the two of them 5-6 years ago, so I cannot say whose puppet Nicușor Dan is right now. I would say that probably he's no longer the puppet of Matei Păun. He's probably the puppet of the deep state, as you say, because the way his brain works does not allow him to be autonomous. So he must be the puppet of somebody. Probably the game has reached a higher level, and now Nicușor Dan has become the puppet of some other forces, some stronger forces. Whereas the previous motivation behind the Nicușor Dan project, why he was elevated up to here by Matei Păun, I could not understand. So Matei Păun was saying things like, "Oh, he's so competent, he's so well-intentioned, he's this and that," but I could not really see that. So I felt that Matei Păun was probably just giving false reasons, let's say, for his support of Nicușor Dan. Matei Păun was just trying to conceal his true motivation, which I do not know. So I have no idea why Nicușor Dan was cultivated in this way, from this raggy activist to becoming the president of Romania. So I don't know.
Do you think this guy Matei Păun still has an influence on Nicușor Dan in any way?
Probably. I saw that he was present at the pro-EU electoral meeting in the Victoria Square a few days ago. So he was photographed there, Matei Păun. I suspect that because they had such a strong bond in the past, probably they still have such a strong bond right now. I don't know if his electoral campaign is still run by Matei Păun. There are people like Andrei Caramitru, for example, who say exactly this, that Matei Păun is still the mastermind of his campaign. This might be the case. It might be true.
I'm not sure about anything that Andrei Caramitru says.
Me neither, but this I can testify to, because
he contradicts himself pretty often. I mean, he was definitely against Nicușor Dan, and now he supports Nicușor Dan. So I can no longer follow the logic, arguments he offers. It makes no sense.
Yeah, that's true, because now everybody who was against Nicușor Dan for his possible affiliation with Russia through Matei Păun have a bigger, let's say, enemy, or they have a bigger fear, that of George Simion, who has no connections to Russia whatsoever. On the contrary, because of his unionism with Moldova and because of his Romanian nationalism, he was indicted in 2 countries and prevented from entering them again, Moldova and Ukraine.
Yeah, like it happens in the pandemics when the epidemiologist Vladimir Putin has ended it suddenly, and nobody talked about pandemics anymore. They started talking about war.
Yeah,
They
so
were
now it's a
saying that we
very
should stay in our homes to save lives, and then have suddenly started to spread propaganda that we should go and fight and die for Ukraine. You know it.
exactly, and now it's very ironic because Nicușor Dan supports right now the camp of the people who want a stronger involvement in Ukraine, who are more anti-Russian, but he was actually the project of a pro-Russian oligarch, if you want. And all the people who used to write in the media that Nicușor Dan is a Russian puppet, right now they just have to shut up and support him because they see George Simion as a bigger threat, even though George Simion's links to Russia are non-existent, whereas Nicușor Dan's links to Russia are quite strong. Because I don't think a pro-Russian oligarch would cultivate such a person for nothing.
I'm really curious. Why is George Simion considered pro-Russian?
This is how the propaganda operates. Because
Yeah, but why? I haven't understood why.
For the same reason that Adrian Năstase was considered pro-Russian in 2004, why Victor Ponta was considered pro-Russian in 2014, why Mircea Joană, who later went to become NATO vice president.
I see George Simion as pretty Russophobic and
He
pro-Israel
is.
rather than pro-Russian.
Absolutely, he is Russophobic. So the propaganda has no connection to reality. It does not even want to have a connection to reality. It just wants to scare the people, and the people who have no idea about politics buy into it. This is how it works.
Yeah,
but of course, no. George Simion is very Russophobic. Actually, I've also met George Simion in person.
Really?
And yes,
I've told you that you are a lucky man.
Yeah, with George Simion, it was a very brief encounter, but it also touched upon the Russophobia, for example.
Really?
I was celebrating my birthday with a couple of friends, and one of them had gone to Transnistria, and at another table was George Simion, and he overheard our discussion, and we wanted to take a picture of him, and he started saying things about Transnistria, like, yeah, it's so bad, and we should take it back, and we should fight those Russians and whatever, So the 30 seconds that I spoke to George Simion, it was about Russophobia, So yeah, George Simion does seem to breathe Russophobia through all his pores, whereas Nicușor Dan has no idea where Russia is on the map. I think Nicușor Dan is not interested in international topics, and right now he's just taking these talking points from his advisors because he represents this Russophobic camp now.
Given George Simion Russophobia, do you think that Nicușor Dan would be a more suitable or better candidate for the Russians?
For the Russians, well, I mean, if we take into account the fact that Russia has an interest to destabilize Romania, then yeah, I think having a neurodivergent president would definitely destabilize Romania, because after Nicușor takes office, it will become evident that he has mental problems. Right now, everything is carefully camouflaged. Everything is staged. His interviews are staged to make him look the best, to put him in the best light. But once he actually takes office, it will not take 10 years like it was with Klaus Iohannis for his supporters to actually realize that they supported an imposter. With Nicușor Dan, it would take maybe 1 month, and people would suddenly wake up to the realization that he's mentally incompetent for the job. So this is why, if Russia wanted to destabilize a country, maybe this would be a very good way, right? To make sure that country elects an incompetent president and on a pro-Western ticket.
Very, very, very interesting. But I'm really curious. Why do you think were the previous elections annulled? And how do you interpret or comment the decision of the Romanian Constitutional Court?
Well, it was obviously an illegal and anti-constitutional measure to cancel the elections and to, arrest the winner and to bar him from running again. and to have the whole election redone, also with the registration of the candidates. Why they did it? I think they got scared. So they were hoping to elect Marcel Ciolacu or maybe Ciucă, to elect some leader of the mainstream political parties. And they ended up with a second round with Călin Georgescu and Elena Lasconi, with two figures from outside the mainstream, let's say. And especially, I think they cancelled the vote altogether because Călin Georgescu stood the best chance of winning the second round. But right now, I think they're starting to doubt their decision, because Călin Georgescu had won the first round only with 23%, I think, whereas now George Simion has won the first round with 41%. So George Simion is way harder to beat in the second round than Călin Georgescu was. Or, well, maybe Călin Georgescu did have a stronger showing against Elena Lasconi, and they thought that if they include Nicușor Dan in the race, then he might stand a better chance of beating George Simion. Maybe this was their calculation, that Elena Lasconi was too weak and they wanted a stronger candidate, even though Nicușor Dan is strong at the level of image, at the level of public image, but himself as a person, I think Elena Lasconi would have made for a better president than Nicușor Dan, given the fact that she's just a regular person. Okay, not very educated, but she's a person that can learn, can develop interests in presidential stuff like foreign policy. Whereas Nicușor Dan, I think, is not very apt to learn things by the way his brain works.
Okay, good argument. But still, why do you think the entire political and media cartel supports Nicușor Dan? And I like to mention the Social Democratic Party, the Liberal National Party, the Union of Salvation, and of course, all the media institutions like Antena 3, Romania TV, Digi24, and so on and so forth.
Well, probably because they would like to make a coalition with the Union Save Romania party, that of Nicușor Dan. So, because all these media organizations are linked to public money, to public funds. Also, during the pandemic, they received a lot of money from the government to support the governmental point of view. So probably their bet is on Nicușor in order for them to preserve these agreements with the political class, and for these mainstream political parties to just co-opt USR, which is standing at 10% or something like this. Whereas AUR, if George Simion were to win the election and AUR would be co-opted into the governmental coalition, AUR would be the second largest party there, and it would have a stronger say. And also probably their calculation is that USR is quite weak. Also, USR is more mainstream. USR is supported by the Brussels elite and by Emmanuel Macron, and therefore they probably would get along better with USR than with AUR. They probably deem AUR to be too radical. And the media organizations probably feel that they have demonized AUR so much, and they have demonized George Simion so much, that their very lucrative partnership with the state would end, so that AUR and George Simion would not extend them public contracts as now.
Let me be the devil's advocate right now.
Please.
Except George Simion, could you tell me three prominent AUR figures in the political spectrum?
Yes, so I would say that Petrișor Peiu is a very good expert on economic policy. I would say Gheorghe Piperea is a very good expert on legal policy. And a very interesting character who is not so well known, Sorin Muncaciu. He is a former surgeon in the United States who retired and came to Romania and entered politics on behalf of AUR. And he said some very good common sense things during the pandemic. And I think he would make a very good health minister. So I can tell you these three experts from AUR whom I trust.
And of course, the most beautiful lawyer, Silvia Uscov.
Of course, yeah. Well, there are many associates.
But she's not from our.
No. She's just a supporter. But there are many beautiful lawyers supporting our because of what they went through during the pandemic and this infringement upon human rights that the government did and that our fought against. So there are many lawyers who actually support our for this.
But can we still talk about democracy when elections are cancelled or when one candidate has total institutional backing?
We are definitely a flawed democracy, or even worse, as the Economist magazine put it, we are a hybrid regime. They launched this rating of European democracies, or actually of world democracies, and Romania was not in the flawed democracy range, but it was in the hybrid regime range, even worse than Moldova. And yeah, you can actually argue that we are no longer a democracy ever since the 6th of December when the elections were cancelled. But there might be some hope. So even though we're no longer in a rule of law, we're no longer in a state that functions according to its constitution, I think we should not demobilize completely, and we should not lose any kind of hope, because this is what the people who orchestrated the coup d'etat are actually hoping for. They're hoping that we will just demobilize and we will just boycott the vote. Whereas I think there are still measures that can be taken to repair the situation a bit. I don't have high hopes, but maybe if George Simion gets elected, and then maybe after he appoints some constitutional judges and so on, he has some legal mechanisms to also appoint prosecutors, heads of the intelligence community. So maybe slowly through this process, also through the co-opting of our in the governmental coalition, maybe something could be repaired in our democracy. But there's also the chance that in case Simion gets elected, the forces that oppose him will stage some sort of Maidan, like it was in Tbilisi after the Georgian Dream Party won the elections last autumn, I think, or last summer. And then the European Union did not recognize the result, even though it was a landslide. It was like 54% or something like this. And subsequently, the NGOs that are funded by the European Union and by the Soros, USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, foundations from the United States, started funding protests who did not want to recognize the result and who eventually turned violent. And the objective was to overturn the popular vote. So even though Georgians voted by a huge margin for that party, there were these external forces and internal forces who wanted to overturn the result. I hope it will not be the case in Romania, even though there is a protest by the Nicușor Dan supporters organized exactly on the Sunday of the elections, so this Sunday evening in the Victoria Square. And it is under the motto either to the ballroom or to the hospital. So I hope that's not exactly an incitement for violent protests, I hope. But the recipe is quite transparent, the recipe for these protests.
I really enjoy Russian ballrooms, I have to tell you.
Well, I'm not sure if they want to go to the Russian ballroom, but
I have attended 2 of them so far. But
yes.
To be again the devil's advocate, if you don't like European values, and if you think Russia has a better democracy, why don't you go to Russia?
You are saying this with respect to the protesters against Simion, against the possible election of Simion, or?
No, I'm saying that if you disapprove Romania's democracy and you think Russia has a better democracy, as many people say, why don't you go to Russia?
Well, I think right now we have the same democracy. So I think both Romania and Russia have the same type of democracy, whereas it is impossible to challenge the status quo. If you are a dissident, then you stand a good chance of getting arrested, like Călin Georgescu found out. If
do
the
you
elections
think
do not
pretty similar in terms of democratic values, Romania and Russia right now? So if you are a dissident of Putin, is the same as if you are a dissident of the European, let's say, rulers right now?
Well, we have not reached that level, but we are slowly inching in that direction. So the fact that Călin Georgescu was arrested after winning the first round and his second round was cancelled does show that there is a status quo, there is an establishment here in Romania that does not want to lose power, and it is not willing to accept the transition to power of another force, the democratic transition to power. And they have a stronghold on the government, just like authoritarian regimes have. Just like it is impossible to actually win the elections against Putin, because Putin is the embodiment of the regime and of the elite, and he has support in these circles that can actually control the election, that can manufacture the result, let's say. We are entering similar waters right now. The fact that the majority of the media space and the political parties, as you said previously, the fact that the majority of them are now behind one candidate, for me, is a very dangerous sign for Romanian democracy, because that makes the other option they're trying to paint the other option as being illegitimate, and I'm afraid that this might lead to making it even illegal. So to charge actually Simion with treason or things like this, because if they say that he's a Russian agent, and if they say that once he enters office, then it would be an act of treason because the secrets of Romania would be in the hands of the Kremlin, as the propaganda says these days, then they might even charge some sort of lawfare operation against him to silence him and to put him in jail, which is what happens in authoritarian regimes. So this is where we are right now. It's not necessary to move to Russia anymore if you want to experience political prison. These people who say what you've said earlier should say, if you want political prison, don't go to Russia. We have political prison at home.
We want a country like abroad, like in Russia.
Like abroad, and now it's going to be the East abroad, not the West abroad anymore.
So basically, do you see the mainstream media acting as a propaganda machine rather than a critical voice?
Unfortunately, yes. And we've been seeing this for the past 5 years. At least I've been seeing it since the pandemic. Maybe it was there before and I didn't see it because I told you I was on the other side of the political spectrum. But during the pandemic, at least, the mainstream media runs on only one voice. And that voice is supporting the people in power right now, and is against the population, the general population. It is busy denouncing various trends in the population, like sovereigntism, the advent of nationalism, and such things. And the media should definitely play a critical role in society. The media should enable a discussion space, not just to promote one point of view, a monolithic point of view, and whoever does not adhere to that point of view to be labeled an enemy of the state. This is what happens only in authoritarian regimes, not in democracies. But this is where we are right now. The only point of view is the one that they strongly promote, and the opposite point of view is completely delegitimized. If you have the opposite point of view, you're a bit shy to express it in public because people will just label you a traitor, a fascist. They instead of toning down all of this rhetoric and all of these labels, which are not productive at all for living together in the same society, they push the pedal even harder on these things. They even say that George Simion wants to give Transylvania to Viktor Orban. They're just trying to smear anything on him just to prevent his victory.
Right. Now, let's move forward. Before making Romania great again, unfortunately without Crin Antonescu in the second round. And let's discuss about European values and hypocrisy. Alfred Simonis from PSD recently said that he supports European values. Was that before or after he threatened to kick George Simion's ass in the Romanian parliament?
Yeah, unfortunately, we do not have the best generation of politicians right now. I now look at debates from the 1990s from Romania's incipient democracy, and they were at a very intellectual level, very high intellectual level. Right now, even the mainstream parties who are claiming that our are extremists, they have also lowered the level of discussion to such a low extent that they even come with physical threats, or there were even some fights in the parliament. Yeah, this is unfortunately the level where we have descended, and maybe it does have to do with the European values as well, because in the European Union, the level of discussion has also been lowered significantly in the last years. There are things which can no longer be discussed; they cannot be put up for debate, and the level of the discourse of people like Ursula von der Leyen or Kaja Kallas, who represent the European Union, is very low. They just make very low level propaganda with cliches and demonizations that debate is no longer possible. It is no longer conducive to an environment where people can debate. So, of course, us being in the European Union and our political parties being almost subsidiaries of the European parties, like PSD is a subsidiary of the European Socialists Party, and the PNL is the local subsidiary of the European People's Party. Then, of course, the lowering of the level there in Brussels also affects the level here. And unfortunately, being a member of the European Union is no longer a driver for the improvement of public discourse, because the level of public discourse in Brussels is very low as well.
So basically, what do European values really mean today in Romania's political context?
Well, European values right now mean just to do what Brussels says. So whatever Ursula von der Leyen says and Kaja Kallas and these European bureaucrats, this is what European values are. If they say peace is a value, okay, it might be in some context, but in Ukraine, definitely not. In Ukraine, the war must go on, and we must supply it. So the values are not consistent. The European values are whatever Brussels decides them to be, whatever suits their agenda, and of course, free speech used to be a European value, not anymore. Even at European level, they are enforcing these mechanisms like the Digital Services Act to stifle public speech, especially towards American media companies like X and Meta. There are many things which used to be European values, and right now they're just propaganda talking points, and they change according to the topic, according to the interests of the Brussels elites.
Is it hypocrisy when those who shouted "fuck PSD" now collaborate with them? And do you think they suffer from PSD, post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yeah, we are now seeing this unlikely union. Before 2020, before the sovereigntists entered parliament, the political system in Romania was divided between the mainstream parties and these apparent radicals at the time, which were the Union Save Romania, the Renew affiliates. And they had very, very strong messages against the Social Democrats, like, as you said, fuck PSD. And now PSD, who was the victim of that campaign, is now teaming up with USR to support Nicușor together. At least their leadership is. I don't think the mayors and the voters in rural Romania, for example, will be very glad to vote for Nicușor Dan as president. But probably this is a Brussels directive. Probably at the level of the leadership, they were told to align themselves again behind Nicușor, and this is what they did.
You would be surprised. I heard about citizens from Teleorman who voted for PSD who are going to vote for Nicușor Dan. We will
Really?
have yes.
That would be a surprise for me. I don't know. I haven't seen such people yet. The only people I know are Nicușor Dan.
We will have a big support for Nicușor Dan in counties like Teleorman.
Interesting. So maybe he actually stands a good chance of winning.
Yes, of course. All the he's the system's choice already.
Yeah, I can see that, but I thought people voting for PSD in rural parts of Romania would not vote for Nicușor Dan just because he's a laughing stock. So when he appears on television, most people laugh. I think they would not be very inclined to stamp him on the ballot, I thought. The only people I know who vote for Nicușor Dan are people from the urban part of Romania, from university towns, from
these are only rumors, so I'm not sure about them. I just heard them. But now let's move forward to another section, more serious stuff, and let's discuss about geopolitics and Ukraine war. I would like to ask you, how should the next Romanian president handle the ongoing war in Ukraine? Should Romania continue to align 100% with NATO EU positions or adopt a more nuanced national interest-driven approach?
Of course, I would be all for the national interest of Romania. Right now, the approach is to do whatever Brussels says and whatever Macron says, because now he's the leader of the Ukraine operation after the United States changed its leadership and is now led by some people who are less keen on this war. Romania's national interest, in my opinion, would be to be neutral with respect to this war, because Ukraine will lose. So it would not be good to be on the losing side. And especially it would be a vulnerability for Romania to extend military support to Ukraine, because that might put it into a direct confrontation with Russia. So I would expect the next president.
And also from an economic point of view, it would be a sunk cost bias. So
not to mention that, exactly, the sunk cost fallacy, the gambler's fallacy. I've lost so much money, so let's lose a bit more because maybe we will turn the tables, but it will not happen. So because the strategy of the Western elites with respect to the war in Ukraine and with respect to Romania, I think, is to keep the conflict going. And because Ukraine is running out of soldiers, I am afraid of a scenario in which, because we have a puppet president, we might enter Ukraine with some troops in order to become a part of this conflict. This is what I'm afraid of. This is why I prefer Nicușor Dan not to win this election, because he is to some extent a puppet of the French government. The party that he runs from and he founded, USR, is a member of Renew Europe, which is run by Macron. He has a PhD in mathematics from Paris. There are many links connecting his party and also himself to France. And right now, France is the main continental driver of the war in Ukraine. And if Nicușor Dan, as I said, who is just unable to be autonomous and who would take directives and he would take orders as a president, if he were to take orders from Macron, I am afraid that Romania might come into this situation, whereas to be seen as the next cannon fodder for this conflict after Ukraine. So this is why I would prefer, of course, a sovereigntist position in which, okay, maybe we continue to help for some reasons because we're in NATO, I don't know, but not to vulnerabilize our position too much, not to make ourselves too vulnerable to a scenario in which we might enter a direct confrontation with Russia and we might become the next Ukraine. This is what I would hope from the next president.
Yeah, so this was my next question. Where do these candidates stand regarding military involvement, support for Ukraine, and relations with Russia? So you basically think that somehow George Simion would be the peace candidate as compared to Nicușor Dan, who would be Macron's puppet.
Pretty much, even though George Simion, because he's so young and because his past is connected to unionism with Moldova and to anti-Russian activities, there might be a scenario in which I could also see George Simion perhaps
As a
entering. Sorry?
As a threat.
To some extent, as a threat to peace, in the sense that, for example, if the front line in the war in Ukraine reaches Odessa, then of course Macron also said that his plan would be to send troops, but because at that point the conflict could extend to Transnistria as well, there might be a possibility that Romania might send troops to help Moldova or something like this. I don't know. There might be a scenario involving Moldova in which George Simion might send troops also for his unionist position, also as a way to perhaps help with the reunification of Romania and Moldova. So there might be a scenario in which George Simion might also get us involved into a war with Russia. Of course, that's a bit far-fetched to say because it's quite a distant possibility in the future. But yeah, right now, Nicușor Dan presents himself as the candidate that would do exactly what Brussels says and what Macron says. And in this respect, in the respect of the war, with respect to the war in Ukraine, yeah, it would be the candidate that if he were to become president, he would send troops there if requested. If Macron told Nicușor to send troops, Nicușor would probably, if it were up to him, he would send troops. Yeah.
So basically, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either way, it's bad for us.
I would hope that George Simion would have better advisors, and from what I've seen, he's advised by Dan Dungaciu, who has a pretty rational position in this conflict and a realist standpoint with regards to the war in Ukraine. I would expect that George Simion would have a rational approach. This scenario with the war involving Moldova and George Simion to send troops, of course, is a distant possibility. Whereas with Nicușor Dan, it is quite a strong possibility given the fact that the European elites are desperate to prolong the conflict in Ukraine and to help Ukraine at any cost. And it would be very convenient for them to have a puppet here in Eastern Europe to use as a proxy, as the next proxy.
So basically, Nicușor Dan would be a losing bet, whereas George Simion, let's say, our hope.
With respect to Ukraine, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, I would like to ask you, do you believe Romania currently has an independent foreign policy? Why or why not?
Well, I would say that Romania right now doesn't have its own foreign policy. The foreign policy establishment, as it is often described, just takes orders from Washington and Brussels. And right now, with Trump being elected in Washington and with Brussels distancing itself from the United States and seeing it as a rival, the foreign policy establishment in Romania has started to take orders only from Brussels, so only from the European Commission and from some European heads of state like Macron. It is quite obvious that Romania doesn't have an independent foreign policy because any kind of theme, any kind of topic that pertains to sovereigntism is strongly discouraged not only by the media but also by the state itself. So it's as if we acknowledge the fact that we are a colony, and any scenario that might change this is seen as a threat by the public policy establishment.
Right. Now, moving to the economy, the next section. What economic direction do you expect from each candidate?
Well, I would expect that George Simion would take a more sovereigntist view also with respect to the economy. So perhaps lowering public debt in the area of foreign aid, the aid that we give to Ukraine, because a lot of the public deficit is caused by the aid to Ukraine, and also before it was caused by the purchasing of more than 100 million
How much? How
doses of
much?
vaccine.
Let's do the math like Nicușor Dan enjoys. How much of this is going to Ukraine? Do you know?
Of course, I don't have the figures with me. I cannot do like back of the envelope calculations right now. But I would expect a sovereigntist position from George Simion. Of course, the economy is not the prerogative of the president. But if George Simion were to win the election, then AUR would be co-opted into the government, probably alongside PSD, or the faction of PSD which wants to collaborate with AUR, and then we would have a more sovereigntist economic position as well, perhaps with the PSD reverting back to the time of Dragnea, when it wanted to promote domestic investment. It wanted to help, for example, Romanian farmers. It wanted to create supply chains for them to be able to sell their produce in stores. To do all sorts of to have all sorts of measures to help the domestic economy and to help perhaps state-owned enterprises, to help domestic entrepreneurship. Whereas Nicușor Dan, being in line with the Western oligarchic interests, it would probably help the multinational companies. It would try to diminish competition from Romanian economic agents. And he would not give any kind of state aid in the direction of supporting Romanian entrepreneurs. It would rather give state aid, as it is now the case, for all sorts of causes in which the European Commission believes, such as helping Ukraine, such as Green Deal, such as the purchasing of 10 vaccines per head, as it was during the pandemic. All of these wasteful policies coming from Brussels would probably be continued under Nicușor Dan, and of course his party USR would also want to privatize things like the health system, the educational system. They have some hardline libertarians there, like Claudiu Năsui, some anarcho-capitalists who actually want to privatize anything that's public. And if they would be co-opted into the government, then perhaps we would have some privatizations of strategic sectors as well.
Right. In this kind of scenario, who do you see being the next leader of PSD? And also, do you see any kind of scenario in which PSD will not be part of the government?
Well, maybe the direction inside PSD will be decided by who wins the election on Sunday. So if Simion would become president and AUR were to be co-opted into the government, then PSD, having to do a coalition government with AUR, they would probably choose a president that is more sovereigntist, that is more in line with the AUR view. So in this situation, probably they would choose somebody like Lior Guța Vasilescu or Claudiu Manda, or some people who were close to Dragnea before the party took the current direction after Dragnea was sent to prison. Maybe they would co-opt Ponta, even though Ponta is no longer a member of PSD. In case Ponta aligns himself with Simion, then he stands a good chance of becoming the president of PSD after Simion wins. But if it's the other way around, sorry?
This time I won't be the devil's advocate. I won't be Ponta's advocate. Because he's a traitor and I cannot trust anything he does or says. But do you think he will announce the support for Simion? So far, he hasn't done anything like that.
Maybe it will be a surprise on Friday, the last day of the electoral campaign. I have no idea, but his supporters are more sovereigntists, so it would be logical for him to try to do some sort of alliance with Simion. I don't know if he will do it, but that would be the reasonable thing to do, given the fact that he, while he was prime minister, was also a bit of a sovereigntist in the multipolar figure. This is why also he had the problems with the law. This is why he was forced to resign. He wanted to attract Chinese investment. He's friends with Erdogan. He's friends with Vucic. He has a more multipolar outlook, and of course, his supporters would not back somebody like Nicușor Dan. This is what I think. But anyway, if Nicușor Dan were to win on Sunday,
although Ponta has not taken votes from diaspora at all, from the sovereignist movement, has only taken votes from PSD, and this made Nicușor Dan enter the second round of the presidential election. So basically, his play was against Crin Antonescu in the first round. So maybe Ponta is a man of the deep state as well, and maybe he is in a coalition, a hidden coalition with Nicușor Dan.
It could be. I mean, the outcome of the election of the first round does suggest that, because if Ponta were not to run, then Crin Antonescu would have entered the second round. But then again, this was the result also the last time with Elena Lasconi and Călin Georgescu, so the sovereigntist and the globalist. So maybe things would have come out in this way now as well. Of course, the difference is that last time PSD and PNL had different candidates, whereas this time they had the same candidate, but Ponta ran against him. So yeah, kind of it was the same. Yeah, basically they teamed up and they had one candidate, Crin Antonescu, in order to avoid the situation when of the previous time when neither of their candidates made it into the second round. But because Ponta ran, then it was exactly the same situation. And it could be.
In the other scenario, maybe you see Victoria Stoițiu as the next Social Democratic Party president?
Probably not Victoria Stoițiu, but Victor Negrescu, who is the leader of the, let's say, globalist USR faction inside PSD. And Victoria Stoițiu and Ruxandra Ivan and some other academic figures are basically under his wing, under his protection there. So probably Victor Negrescu would be the president of PSD if Nicușor Dan were to get elected, and the prominent roles would be reserved for Victoria Stoițiu, as you said, for Ruxandra Ivan and such people.
Yeah, I would have preferred to move forward with Crin Antonescu, but now let's get back to the economy.
And you would have supported Crin Antonescu now instead of George Simion, right?
Yes, I voted for Crin Antonescu, and for the matter of fact, I know that he was actually in the second round, so he won more votes than Nicușor Dan, but those votes were frauded in diaspora. I know this from two sources, very trusted sources. I'm not sure if he knows this fact. I think he knows that his votes were stolen, so maybe this is why he's
so pissed off.
Yeah, I don't think. Not only there were traitors, but they actually have stolen the vote, because from what I know, Crin Antonescu was in the second place, and they made this switch very easily in the night, like thieves do.
Really?
The night, yes, because from the very beginning, actually, Nicușor Dan was the man of the system. At some point, I thought they are going to make a compromise and choose Crin Antonescu as being more centrist to keep both sides in a way satisfied, or the society less polarized. But eventually, the French
connection.
Yes, and I think Crin Antonescu was also very surprised, because let's face it, Marcel Ciolacu was the most honest guy in this election. He really supported Crin Antonescu. Other people were not honest. Nicușor Dan was also not honest, because he had a lot of support from other parties and also from the deep state. But Marcel Ciolacu was honest. He supported Crin Antonescu, and I think Crin Antonescu was very disappointed of this result. because it's simple to look in which counties he got very, very few votes. In Brașov, in Cluj-Napoca, in Sibiu, and we know who those guys are. They are
The
from
liberals.
old PDL, right? From those people supporting Băsescu and all these people who governed Romania 35 years and brought us in this scenario, in this very polarized situation right now, because we're having to choose between two extremes. No matter what we choose, there are two extremes fighting right now. So we no longer have a centrist option. So given this, I would like to ask you, should Romania right now focus on reindustrialization, food and energy independence, or further economic integration with the West?
Well, I support the sovereignist position on this. Of course, I would like more industrial policy focused on reindustrialization, as you said, food security, because the West is in recession. Germany is in a structural recession. The West is being deindustrialized, and further integration with the West would make Romania even more vulnerable because it would strengthen its role as an annex to the West. Instead of Romania developing its own economy, it is just an outsourcing economy for Western enterprises. It is a place where they just exploit cheap labor and perhaps access to resources to create an extension of their own economies back home. And this makes Romania, of course, very vulnerable to such shocks as, for example, you have the recession in Germany and to the probably coming economic crisis. There will probably be a correction worldwide, just like there was in 2008. And the more integrated you are with the West, who will be the main, let's say, victim of this crisis, the more you will suffer as well. I don't think these things are necessarily either an either-or problem. I mean, of course, you can always deepen your connection with the West through various means, accessing more European Union funds, for example. But it also matters what you do with them, how you develop yourself, how you develop your own industry. And right now, I think the model that is most successful on the planet is no longer the neoliberal model of globalization, but rather the ascent of national industries in this world where you have trade barriers, where you have sanctions. Now it's becoming more and more apparent that a strong economy is one with a strong industrial base, rather than just one with let's say, a service outsourcing profile, like Romania is to a large extent.
Overall, do you think Romania has benefited economically from joining the European Union? And if yes, how much?
Well, to some degree, it has definitely.
Did it deserve to give up on its own sovereignty, for instance?
Well, this is a very good question. Obviously, there was a trade-off. They would not allow us to enter the European Union if we were not willing to give up our national resources, for example. So the national oil company, to allow Western companies to come and exploit our gas resources and so on. Yeah, of course, it's a hard calculation to make because Romania has also benefited from being a member of the European Union, not only through European Union funds, but also through the access to high labor, high wage countries of Romanians like myself. I've also lived in the Netherlands for a few years. It was very beneficial for the Romanian population to gain access to places where they could make 3, 4, 5 times the salaries that they could make in Romania. This also helped through remittances. So there were also flows coming back to Romania as a consequence of this. But on the other hand, we no longer have national champions. We no longer have companies that are Romanian and that are successful even on the domestic market, not only at the international level. So, to a large degree, this economy that is now the Romanian economy is not Romanian. the gross domestic product includes the majority of the stuff that Western companies produce here. It is very, very hard to say, of course, to give a definitive verdict whether or not it was a good thing to join the European Union. It was probably a good thing because that was the spirit of the time. In 2007, when we entered, there was no alternative. There were no BRICS. There was no China, for example, was just a developing economy back then. You could not say that you want to base your economic strategy on China because China was not the powerhouse it is today. Whereas now things have turned. The geoeconomic center of weight, the geoeconomic center of gravity is no longer in the Atlantic. It is no longer between Europe and the United States, but it is rather somewhere in Central Asia, probably. It is the Asian economies that are now bigger than the Western economies, and they are growing. They're also growing faster. So from an economic point of view, probably what would make most sense in the next decades would be an integration with the East, with the resource-based Russian economy and with the production-based and export-based Chinese economy. But right now we're in this block. We're in the European Union. There are exit
like
costs.
BRICS.
Sorry?
Like BRICS.
Yeah, like BRICS, but BRICS are countries that have no trade barriers with each other. They function like an economic union, and we are inside another economic union. So we're in bubbles that cannot
Coexist.
Well, they can coexist, but it's hard to cross from one bubble to the next. They will probably just be adjacent bubbles, but it's basically, a country needs to exit the European Union before becoming a member of BRICS. So right now, this opportunity is lost for us.
So maybe the best compromise right now for us is to stick to the European Union and the current partnerships we have, but in the same time, maybe develop our own foreign policy and economic ties with other countries as well.
This is what I would think. Something like Hungary does. So Hungary is a member of the European Union. Hungary is a member of NATO, but Hungary has excellent economic ties with China. When Xi Jinping came to do a European tour, it only went to France to speak to Macron because they regard France to be somewhat independent of the United States. So to be able to have a bilateral relationship that is not dictated by Washington. And then they went to Hungary and Serbia. So the only other two countries that they considered relevant, and one of them is not in the European Union, Serbia, and the other one is Hungary. So yeah, there's a lot of Chinese investment in Hungary. Also, Hungary has an excellent relationship with Erdogan, with Turkey. Hungary also has an excellent relationship with Russia. So with all the centers of power, not to mention the fact that Orban himself has an excellent relationship with Donald Trump. So yeah, if Romania were to become sovereign, I think it should take the example of Hungary and to try a multipolar approach in its foreign policy without exiting any bloc that it is currently in, like without exiting NATO or the European Union, but just to slowly develop ties to this emerging world and this emerging reality, because this set of countries will actually shape the agenda for the next century. It will not be old Western Europe, but it will rather be Asia, the continent that will set the rules in the next 100 years.
But I remember that Andrei Karamitru was saying that Hungary has not benefited economically from this multipolar approach, let's say, and that we are doing better than them.
It is true, but it is not that Hungary has not benefited from the multipolar approach. It was that Hungary was sabotaged actively by Brussels. Hungary was in the same position as Cuba. So the United States had a neighbor with a different economic system, and in order not to show the world that that economic system could be better, they sabotaged it for decades on end with embargo, with everything. The same thing the Brussels did against Hungary in the last years. So they cut the European funding for Hungary for supposed rule of law violations and stuff like this. They also discouraged investment in Hungary, and they even went so far as to, there was a leak from Brussels that the European Commission wanted to actually orchestrate a speculative attack against the forint.
So, like it happened these days in Bucharest with the euro and the Romanian lion.
Sorry?
Like it happened these days in Bucharest with the euro and the Romanian lion.
Well, I'm not sure what the cause of this was. Of course, it was not such a strong depreciation, but it was the psychological threshold of 5 lei per euro.
It was an attempt of manipulation of the forex exchange rate, so that people would fear from an economic downturn if George Simion becomes elected. It's obviously a speculation, a short-term speculation, increase of volatility. But people who are less educated economically might, I don't know, get afraid. And I've seen two kinds of people who don't support George Simion. I would like to tell you, those who are afraid that will lose their jobs, will lose their pensions, that everything will go wrong economically. And the other ones who see him unfit for this position because he's way too aggressive, because he acts or acted in the past, I don't know, like a hooligan, like an uneducated man or stuff like that. And on the other side, we have this Nicușor Dan, who is a winner, right, at the Olympiad or something like that, who is good with maths, and he will do, I don't know what he will do, I'm not sure, but he will preserve at least the status quo, right? So we will move in the same direction like before. Nothing will change, but at least this doesn't scare people. This is what I see from as an observer.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that this was a currency speculative attack. I've also heard voices, however, who said that the National Bank of Romania had this as a plan already for some months to depreciate a bit the currency because the Romanian leu was too strong against the euro. I'm not sure which theory to believe, but anyway, the scenario is definitely not that it's a catastrophe induced by Simion. It's not because of the fact that he went into the second round that he caused it. So it could be that some people caused it in order to link it to him, or it could be that it was just a necessary step to be taken because our public debt is high and it was just becoming unsustainable to keep the exchange rates at below 5 lei per euro.
Yeah, what I can tell is that the euro RON exchange rate so far has been very stable for the past 4 or 5 years. So whoever invested in our own national currency has won a lot more than by keeping money in euro, which seem to be a more stable currency, let's say.
Yeah.
Now, moving forward, I would like to discuss a little bit about polarization and the deep state. These people who influence elections from the inside or the outside, we don't know. I'd like to ask you, what does the extreme polarization between Simion and Dan say about the state of Romanian democracy?
Well, I think it's a sorry example. I think it's a sorry situation, the one that we have arrived to, because as you said earlier, there is no more political center, and the space for debate has basically collapsed. Everybody's polarized. Everybody's at one extreme. People are fighting, and this is definitely not conducive for good relations, because these elections happen every 5 years, but throughout this time people also need to collaborate. They do not need to see each other as enemies. Unfortunately, the political centrum has evaporated, and that political centrum also had some expertise because they ran the country for the past 35 years. They did have some specialists in various fields. Right now, because the political spectrum has become so polarized, we are entering to some extent in the area of experiments. Just like USR in government was an experiment, a failed experiment, I think, a tragic experiment. But anyway, perhaps AUR can also be seen as a risk, as an experiment for the Romanian government to co-opt a sovereigntist movement that has never been in power, to make it the second largest party in power in a coalition government. That might also make it unforeseeable. So there might be consequences which we right now cannot foresee through the fact that these people have never been in power. With regards to the deep state, I don't know, because I don't really have connections to the deep state. So all I can say is what I can speculate upon from public information. The Romanian deep state right now is obviously not sovereigntist. It is trying to sabotage the sovereigntist movement as much as it can. It wants to promote this globalist candidate who is not only globalist in doctrine, but he's also a puppet. Therefore, he is perfectly maneuverable for whoever will be his handler from the deep state when he takes office and becomes president, which I think is a liability for Romania, and it sets us even more down the path of a colony. Usually, the deep state should be sovereigntist because they take a military oath, they swear on the flag and on the constitution to defend the interest of Romania. But I don't know how many people from the deep state actually believe what they swore, and these are the effects we can see.
Still, how do you explain the elimination of centrist candidate Crin Antonescu from the second round? Was this a democratic failure or a system correction?
Well, from the information that you gave, that he was sabotaged, maybe it was not something that came out of the democratic process. But if we just look at things as they appear, it seems that the mainstream parties have just lost any kind of credibility, especially in light of the annulment of the previous election, of the previous presidential election. And what people wanted to sanction them, people wanted to give them a vote of no confidence. So even though they managed to stitch together a coalition and to present only one presidential candidate for the three parties in power, even though it was an obvious thing that candidate would make it at least into the second round, if not win the election outright, because of this volatilization of the political center in Romania, Crin Antonescu just did not reach the threshold. So yeah, you could say that it is a system correction, but that would mean that we are actually entering a new stage of the system in which there are only sovereigntists and globalists, like hardcore tefelist globalists, versus the sovereigntists. And the mainstream political parties like PSD and PNL are just the referees of the game. They are like they will be the parties that will help build political majorities rather than so they will be the junior parties in the alliances from now on.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the deep state will try to steal the elections at a much larger scale than in the first round because the stakes are higher right now. The winner will become the next president of Romania or France.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe there will be some irregularities. I don't know. We will see. I just hope that in case George Simion wins, I hope his adversaries will accept the result of the election and they will accept the will of the people, and they will not try to oust him in an undemocratic manner as to stage a Maidan, a color revolution, something like this. Because they do have the means how to do it. It's in the toolkit.
But some of them believe that
the Western
Euromaidan
press.
resembles European values, actually,
In my naivete, I thought that democracy was a European value, but apparently overturning democracy is right now the best European value. Like, if the Ukrainians vote wrong, just overturn their will. If the Georgians vote wrongly, overturn their will. If the Americans vote wrongly, overturn their will. And I don't know, maybe it will be the case with Romania as well.
Democracy should represent free will. But what we see and notice these days is that some people try to convince you, so a minority tries to convince you that this is how you should vote. This is the right vote. And if you vote differently, you're doing a mistake.
Yeah, they're trying to actually terrorize people. They're trying to scare people, as you said previously, that they're going to lose their pensions, they're going to lose their salaries.
They try to scare people. They try to manipulate people. They try to blackmail people. I heard an example of someone from Alba Iulia, I think, or I'm not sure which city it was, who was told that if she doesn't vote, she's a doctor, she will lose her job if she doesn't vote for Nicușor Dan. And this is unbelievable, I mean, it's pretty frustrating for someone not only to tell you how you should vote, but actually to impose you some, let's say, punishments for being naughty, for being democratic. It's not good to be democratic here in Romania. It's good only in Russia if you're against Putin. Otherwise, you're a bad guy, and you should go to jail because you're a Putinist, you're a Russophile, you're a fascist. I don't even understand. Do they think that Simion is a fascist? Do they think that he's a Russophile? Do you think that he's a communist? I can no longer follow their arguments because they are contradictory.
Yeah, I don't think they actually believe all of these things that they say about Simion. It's just that they're desperate. They need to overcome 20% to reach his score in the first round, and they need another 10% to actually gain the majority. So they're
desperate and aggressive, very aggressive,
extremely aggressive, and they're trying to say everything that can stick. It doesn't matter that being a fascist and being a communist.
All this cartel, is very, very aggressive, trying to convince you that you have only one choice, not two choices between Simion and Dan, but one choice, Nicușor Dan.
Yeah, this is obviously not very democratic, because in a democratic landscape, you should be allowed to vote for whoever you want, and you should not be terrorized or blackmailed into voting for whoever the propaganda system wants. And I do not think that they actually believe that he's with Russia, or that he's a fascist, or that he's a communist, because they say these things in succession about him, even though they're contradictory. The fascists were not exactly aligned with Russia, historically speaking. Fascists and communists were also quite incompatible, but he somehow manages to represent all the evil in the world and all the extremist doctrines together. He's a fascist and a communist at the same time. He's a Nazi and a pro-Russian, and all of these things just because he's from outside the political system. He has not been in power yet, but at the European level, he's aligned with the most benign conservative group. So there are three sovereigntist groups in the European Parliament. One is the one with AfD and Vazrajdane from Bulgaria, which is called Europe of Sovereign Nations, and that's the smallest of the two, but also the most radical. They actually want their countries to get out of the European Union and maybe join BRICS. There's then the less radical Patriots for Europe with Orban and with Jordan Bardella from France, from the Rassemblement National. And Simion is in the more mainstream group with Meloni, with Bart de Wever, the Prime Minister of Belgium. So they're just somehow conservatives. They're not Eurosceptics. They're just anti-federalists. So they would not want the European Union to just dissolve the national governments and just to become a Europe of regions where the unelected bureaucracy of Brussels just rules over entities which have no say in their domestic affairs. This is the federalist project, and this is what the conservatives in the European Parliament are against. But they're not for exiting the European Union or anything like that. They're pro-Atlanticist. Nothing of the sort. Nothing extremist of the sort.
So basically, George Simion is still a pro-EU choice.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah,
and even pro-NATO, right?
absolutely. He had no statements whatsoever against the United States or against NATO. He was very well received in the United States, in the Trump team, in the MAGA team. He has very good connections there.
He even said that he wants to strengthen this strategic partnership with the US.
Yeah. The European Federalist project would rather have the EU become a military power by organizing its own army outside of NATO. So Simion is opposed to that. Simion is basically a candidate for the status quo of the European Union as it is right now. Well, not with Ursula and not with these things that we've witnessed in the past 5 years, but just of the traditional architecture of the European Union, where you have national governments and you have this overarching structure above them, which has some say in matters of trade, in matters of cohesion, languages, economic matters in general, freedom of movement and so on, but it does not become a political bloc like a federal state with its own army and with only one foreign affairs responsible that overrides the foreign policy of every member state and so on. So Simion is against the federalist project. His political family in the European Union is against the federalist project, which means that he's just pro the EU as it is right now, with a council that can balance the Commission and the council that is where the heads of state and heads of government are represented, and to maintain the relationship with the United States also as it is inside NATO, and not for the European Union to develop its own army and so on. So in this respect, Nicușor Dan is the radical break from the official traditional EU architecture, because he's a puppet of the federalist project, of the project in which the European Union would become a state, a federal state, and countries would no longer have any kind of veto over even national security or even foreign policy, things like this.
Right. Now, Adrian, moving to the final section, I'd like to ask you, who do you think will eventually win and why?
It's a very hard thing to say. The bets are in Simion's favor. So prediction markets indicate that Simion is the more likely candidate to win, because he has an insurmountable lead, and also because he's more aligned with the vision of most Romanians.
From a quantitative approach, but from a qualitative approach, I believe maybe Nicușor Dan is the favorite of the system. So it's pretty close.
Of the system, yes.
Yes.
But in terms of the values of the majority of Romanians, for example, I look back to the pandemic when the majority of Romanians did not take the COVID vaccine, and Simion was the number one protester against the mandate, against COVID mandates and against discrimination for the unvaccinated and all these things. So I hope that the majority of Romanians have not forgotten this aspect, the fact that Simion was the one that defended their rights during the pandemic. Also, regarding the Ukraine war, I think most Romanians are against a stronger involvement of Romania in the war against Russia. I think most Romanians would choose peace and would not want to see themselves or their loved ones being called up for military service and then being sent to the Dnieper. So in this sense, also Simion is more aligned with the majority of Romanians. Also, in terms of the woke culture, the majority of Romanians reject wokeism. They reject the indoctrination of children in school with respect to the fact that they can change their sex and all these things. So yeah, there are many things on which the majority of Romanians are aligned with Simion. But as you said, the system is rooting for Nicușor. So we will see. It will be a tough battle if the majority will finally be able to vote according to its interests, or it will be intimidated and Nicușor will win.
All in all, you see George Simion as a safer choice for Romanians, but a very tough battle between the democratic vote and the system's choice, Nicușor Dan.
Absolutely. Yeah, the system will try to use any kind of leverage in its power to move some votes for Nicușor Dan and to somehow hopefully pass the threshold of 50% and to defeat Simion. And
maybe they will reinvent some mercenaries. They will find another Potra, or who knows.
Exactly, like they staged the operation with Georgescu to claim that 4 people in a car were trying to do a coup d'etat in Bucharest with just cutters and baseball bats. Maybe they will find something similar now. I don't know, some things to charge Simion with, because it is not enough to just win the popular vote and become president. You have to stage a coup d'etat to become president alongside winning the popular vote. So if they went with the story that Georgescu, while winning the second round, was also planning a coup d'etat with 4 people in a car, then yeah, maybe they will do the same with Simion. They will say that I don't know what he has planned.
But do you believe that Mr. Ciuvică is going to vote for Mr. Nicușor Dan?
That's what he said, right?
Yes.
Well, if he said it, it counts even more than doing it, because he influenced some people into doing the same. It doesn't matter if he will stamp Nicușor or not. The fact that he said it is kind of enough for a part of his followers.
It's unbelievable, but I'm a believer, you know.
I know. It's shocking to see the opposite camps joining hands, and also to support the weakest candidate in history. I think Nicușor Dan, just as a person, he's the weakest president Romania could have had in its democratic history.
Do you think
Romanian establishment is behind him?
Do you think Romanians will regret Klaus Iohannis?
Yes. If Nicușor Dan comes into office, they will regret Klaus Iohannis, because at least Klaus Iohannis.
I have a friend saying that Klaus Iohannis is the best president Romania had since Nicolae Ceausescu, and I've asked him how so, and he says, "Say me another one. Tell me another name." Except Iohannis. Since Ceausescu.
I mean, I think
he was better than Iliescu, he was better than Constantinescu, and he was better than Băsescu. And he's the best.
Well, maybe he was better because he had the longer term, because the elections were cancelled, so he served even more than 10 years. He served 10 years and 2 months. But at least Klaus Iohannis was presentable. He could go to summits, and because he's tall, he could appear as a good representative of Romania. He spoke German. There are qualities in Klaus Iohannis that we don't see in
Nicușor Dan.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it to Nicușor Dan, who has no posture, he speaks very poor English. Okay, he speaks French because he's lived there, but his English is very poor. At least Klaus Iohannis had some sort of international outlook. Nicușor Dan has no clue about international affairs. Klaus Iohannis was mentally competent in the sense that he could think straight, even though he was on vacation most of the time. Nicușor Dan is just a random variable, you have no idea what can come out of him. He's like a black box, and on every matter he can surprise you. He can give you strange, random things.
What about the next lady, Ilinca Simion, or maybe
first mistress,
or maybe Mrs. Mirabela, or why not the next ladies, Ilinca Simion and Cristela Georgescu, both of them.
Yeah, well, they were married women, but Mirabela, or what her name is, she's Miss. She's not a
from
Mrs.
Vaslui. She's from Vaslui, you know.
Yeah, and she would not be the first lady. She would be the first mistress because she's a concubine. She's not the wife. So yeah, and she's not Mrs. She's Miss. I don't know. It would be a very strange pair. It would be stranger than Macron with his wife.
By the way, Nicușor Dan and Matei Păun are not together, so they are not concubines, right?
Man, I have no idea. I cannot.
I hope so.
Speculate. I cannot speculate. I cannot say either way because I have no idea. I don't know.
Who knows?
I have not seen the personal side of Nicușor Dan, let's say.
But Adrian, is it even possible right now, after the annulled elections, for a candidate to defeat the deep state in Romania?
Maybe yes, maybe no. So maybe at the ballot box, it is possible to defeat the deep state. But what happens afterwards, if the elections will be annulled again, or if there will be protests to overturn the elected candidate and so on, this remains to be seen.
Because I know someone, Bogdan Duca, I think his name is, and he says that he wants to vote for anyone because if Simion was allowed to be part of this election, this means that he is approved by the system. This means that he is a candidate of the deep state as well, and it doesn't matter who you vote for. What do you think about this kind of argument?
Well, this logic could have also been applied to Călin Georgescu the first time he ran, because he was approved by the system, he was allowed to run, and after he won the elections, he was cancelled.
Yeah, but he was allowed because nobody expected for him to get any kind of reasonable amount of votes.
Maybe it's the same with Simion. Maybe they did not expect Simion to stand a good chance in the second round. Maybe they expected him to poll about 30% and not 40%, and then for him to be easily defeatable
by creating a big polarization in the second round.
Exactly, but right now the polarization might not be enough because Simion just needs 9% more.
And which kind of polarization? Because so far we have PSD versus anti-PSD. Right now we have globalism against progressists. We also have, let's say, traditional values versus wokeism. So it's pretty complicated right now to estimate. And also people are maybe scared to tell who they would vote for in the polls that appear in this week or previous week. So maybe they are not telling anymore the truth because they are conservatives.
They're afraid. Yeah.
They're afraid.
Yeah, it could be. I also know people who voted for Ponta just because they did not want Nicușor to enter the second round, and they thought Ponta might have a good chance to beat
But I have to tell Adrian, I have to tell something. People who voted for USR are very, very smart. They knew how to estimate odds, how to look at each candidate, what kind of chance he has, and have switched all the votes from Lasconi, almost all of them.
Yeah,
she had like 22%, and now she left with 2%, and they switched all the votes from her to Nicușor Dan. Whereas the other
voting,
yeah, very strategic. This is what I'm
telling.
Whereas
PSD, they just split their vote evenly.
There are people who are in urban areas, very educated in the IT, so very smart, right? Whereas the other idiots, let's face it, they didn't vote strategically. So if they didn't want Nicușor Dan in the second round, the smart choice would have been Crin Antonescu because he had the highest odds. So why would you vote for Ponta? I mean, except Mirel Palada, who obviously is a friend of Ponta, and they have some kind of affairs together. Nobody believed Ponta has any kind of chance. Okay, he could have taken some votes from PSD. He obviously didn't take anything from Simion, or at least in the diaspora, he got 2%. So basically, why would you?
It's
just
hard
because
to
it has the sovereign,
polls.
Okay.
just because opinion polls were so bad 6 months ago in estimating who would go into the second round, there are people who believed Mirel Palada's polls, for example, and thought that Ponta is the one that's head-to-head with Nicușor. So, yeah. If we have such unprofessional pollsters,
it's
hard
like
to develop a good strategy.
Here is like in the prisoner's dilemma. They should have cooperated and vote for Crin Antonescu because he had the best odds. But unfortunately,
but then Ponta and Antonescu should have cooperated in the beginning because
but maybe Ponta cooperated with Nicușor Dan. So this is what I believe right now.
It could be right. Those photos taken with that general, that deep state figure. Maybe Nicușor and Ponta.
We don't even know if those photos are accurate or not so far. So maybe they are. I don't know.
Maybe they are. Maybe it was all a strategy to push Nicușor Dan into the second round. Maybe.
Who knows? We will never probably find out. But if I were president, this would have never happened.
Of course.
I have to tell this. Right now, Adrian, I have also a personal question for you. I'd like to ask you, if Simion wins the elections, do you plan entering politics and maybe getting involved into our or some other party?
Well, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. It has crossed my mind. I cannot say for sure that I will or that I won't. I don't know. We'll see how things evolve. So right now I have not received any kind of offer, but I'm open to offers. So I don't know. Maybe if some collaboration comes up, I will not say no. We'll see what the future brings.
You will think about it like
Sorry?
You will think about it as in a free and open society, right?
Exactly. How about yourself?
I'm not sure. I was a member of PNL many years
PNL?
ago.
I thought
PNL,
maybe
yes.
of PSD. Really? You are a member of PNL?
No, PNL. When the president was Crin Antonescu, and okay. I liked him very much. He was a true leader, and I think he was the best possible president for Romania in these elections. This is why I voted for him in the first round of the second election.
The first round, yeah.
I have to think about the rounds right now, because in the first round of the first election, I voted for Simion because I didn't have any other choice. But when they were played again, let's say, when the rematch happened, I thought Crin Antonescu, I thought rationally that he's a better fit for this position and the best choice from these candidates. Yeah. Otherwise, of course, I would have voted for Călin Georgescu against Elena Lasconi if elections weren't annulled. But once again, if I were president, then this would have never happened, for elections to be annulled.
Unfortunately, we had Klaus Iohannis, and he was very sloppy.
Yeah. So, in the end, ladies and gentlemen, I believe Romania deserves a president with vision, courage, and national pride. One who leads, not one who obeys. And may we vote for sovereignty, identity, and the greatness of our country. I hope we will have a president which will have a direction to move forward, and not only a president who can take directives from Brussels. Let's make Romania great again. Let's make Romania powerful again. And let's make ourselves proud again of our own country. In May the best candidate win. God bless Romania. God bless us all. Adrian, finest last words are yours.
I support this message wholeheartedly. I hope we will have good news on Sunday, and the majority of Romanians will come out to vote for George Simion. If not, they will regret it. They will regret it very fast, seeing Nicușor in action. And yes, I also hope that Romania becomes sovereign again. because it deserves to. The Romanian people deserve to be sovereign, and it is also now the trend. It is also possible. Maybe 20 years ago, we would not have had this possibility. We would not have had this discussion. But right now, sovereigntism is the name of the game everywhere. In Washington, D.C., in European countries, this is the new political paradigm, and it would be a shame to waste it. It is now also a time when we can synchronize in the political wave that is sweeping the West. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you also for being with me today, and thank you all for watching our show today. No matter what happens, I'm pretty sure we'll keep moving forward. Go Romania! Let's make Romania great again, and go Simion. Have a nice day, and bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
You very much.
Thank you.